Hail, travelers, and welcome to the Knight's Realm. Here in the realm of Camelot, I, the Guardian Knight, venture deep into the archives of popular culture and entertainment to bring you all my own perspective on such matters. Now, join me as we delve deep beneath the castle and begin our quest. Today, our journeys take us to a galaxy far, far away, as we take a look at the Prodigal Knight and his many identities in and out of universe. Be warned. Spoilers for the Knights of the Old Republic and Star Wars The Old Republic games and their tie-in media lay ahead. Continue at your own peril.
The Jedi do not believe in killing their prisoners. No one deserves execution, no matter what their crimes.
The Council would not normally accept an adult for training, but this is a special case.
They say the Force can do terrible things to a mind. It can wipe away your memories and destroy your very identity.
Tatooine. Kashyyyk. Manaan. Korriban. Revan visited each of these worlds searching for clues to reveal the hidden location of the Starforge.
The lure of the dark side is difficult to resist. I fear this quest to find the Starforge could lead you down an all too familiar path.
What greater weapon is there than to turn an enemy to your cause, to use their own knowledge against them?
In 2003, the computer RPG Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic was released. Set 4,000 years prior to the events of the Skywalker saga, it follows a war between the Jedi and a Sith Empire under the rule of the villainous Darth Malak, last living apprentice of the enigmatic Darth Revan. Throughout the game, players learn snippets of Darth Revan's history, from his heroic campaign against the Mandalorians to his rise to power as Dark Lord of the Sith. By the game's climax, it is discovered that you, the player, are in fact Darth Revan, but with your memory and all that you once were erased. Essentially, you are a blank shell with the shadow of Revan's personality lingering deep within the recesses of your mind. 2 years later, in 2005, the sequel, Knights of the Old Republic 2: The Sith Lords, was released. This game, set 2 years after its predecessor, follows the Jedi Exile, an old ally of Revan's, as they discover what happened during the events of the Mandalorian Wars. Herein, more truths about Revan are encountered, as told by his former master Kreia and many of his ex-followers. It is revealed that there is more to his fall to the dark side than meets the eye, and that answers can only come if the exile follows him into the worlds beyond Republic space. This is where Revan's story begins to diverge, and not for the better. In the Knights of the Old Republic duology, we are given a decently clear picture of the kind of man, or woman if the player selects that option, Darth Revan was. Bold, brash, charismatic, deeply philosophical, and dedicated to his own way of doing things. He was a natural leader who saw the weakening of Jedi values in his day, a weakening that led to the Republic's own. Thus he defied the Jedi Council and led all who would follow him against the Mandalorian. The most fascinating facet of Revan's character, however, is in his fall to the dark side. We learn little of his path to darkness in the first game, but in the second, Kreia offers an interesting perspective.
Revan's choices were always his own. It was not teaching or circumstance or example, it was him. And there is something that the Council may never understand, that perhaps Revan never felt. The difference between a fall and a sacrifice is sometimes difficult, but I feel that Revan understood that difference more than anyone knew. The galaxy would have fallen if Revan had not gone to war. Perhaps he became the Dark Lord out of necessity, to prevent a greater evil. I do not believe the Jedi Council changed Revan as they claimed. They merely stripped away the surface and allowed the true self to emerge again, someone who was willing to wage war to save others. But that is my belief, since I knew Revan from long ago, as a master knows their apprentice.
This calls everything we learn in the first game into question. The little we learn then paints Revan as a cruel conqueror, a similar character to Darth Vader. A young man who grew disillusioned with the Jedi and thus sought out other answers. But Krea's point of view paints a different picture. Mandalore the Preserver, formerly known as Canderous Ordo, adds to this picture when he tells Visas Mar what Revan told him.
Canderous?
Get away from me. I don't need your help. Just leave me here.
Canderous, the Force lies in all living things. I have watched my people die. You will survive. You have no choice. You have been wounded before and lived, Mandalorian. Rise. Many battles do you still have left in you.
You sound like Revan. At the end. Do you know what he told me in those last days on the Outer Rim? That the Mandalorian Wars were our doom, and that we had been deceived, that it had never been our decision to wage war on the Republic. Revan said the Mandalorians didn't invade the Republic space 10 years ago because it was our choice. We were tricked. Our entire people sacrificed as pawns, and never knew it. He said there was a war coming, and it was waiting out in the unknown regions, in the dark, waiting for us to destroy each other.
A war? This war?
No, not this one. Another one. More terrible. Against an evil we couldn't begin to comprehend. A war of belief that had been fought for thousands of years. Revan went off to fight it.
And left you here.
Revan was one of the greatest military leaders in the galaxy. In history. He knew what he was doing. And I always follow orders.
While waging war against the Mandalorians, Revan discovered that they were not acting of their own free will, but were instead pawns of the dark side, of the true Sith. Revan ventured deep into the unknown regions and discovered them, the Sith, lying in wait to destroy the Republic. After the Mandalorian Wars and the war with Exar Kun decades earlier, the Republic, the Jedi, were unprepared for a fully fledged Sith Empire, where each Dark Lord was on the level of Darth Nihilus. Thus, he decided the Republic needed to be stronger. So he sought out the teachings of the Sith and taught them to his followers. He renamed himself Darth Revan, and began to seek out the Starforge, a great weapon forged by the infinite empire of the Rakata thousands of years prior. With the ships and droids forged by the Starforge and the armies at his disposal, Revan began to conquer the Republic. However, as he conquered, he made certain to keep the infrastructure of the Republic intact. After all, he did not want to dominate the Republic. He wanted to save it. Unfortunately, his apprentice Darth Malak did not see the wisdom in Revan's ambitions. He had fallen fully to the dark side and sought to conquer all in his path. Thus, he betrayed Revan, which led to his master losing his memory and being reprogrammed by the Jedi. After the Jedi Civil War, however, Revan regained his memory. He relearned his mission, and he set off to fulfill it. Or so KOTOR 2 would have us believe. In the novel simply entitled Revan, all of what was learned in KOTOR 2 is thrown out. Revan's fall was not a sacrifice, and his choices were not his own. Instead of being a noble hero who chose a darker path for the greater good, Revan was instead a victim, a pawn of the Sith Emperor. According to the novel, when Revan and Malak discovered the truth about the Mandalorians, they ventured into the unknown regions and discovered the Sith Empire on Dromund Kaz. There, they were captured by the Sith Emperor Vitiate and brainwashed to be his servants. The quest for the Starforge, the fall to the dark side, the Jedi Civil War, it was all the result of this previously unknown Sith Emperor, this villain who came out of nowhere. Suddenly, instead of this being a story of sacrifice and exploring the morality of the Star Wars universe, it becomes the plot of The Winter Soldier. While a good film in its own right, Winter Soldier only works because we are meant to feel sympathy for Bucky Barnes. Revan was never supposed to be a character we felt sorry for, a victim of circumstance. He was meant to fill the audience with awe, with intrigue. Any tragedy that befell him was akin to a Greek tragedy, a larger-than-life warrior facing impossible odds. All of Revan's philosophy, all of his actions, all of his intrigue is thrown to the wayside for a cheap villain reveal, and the MMO that followed the novel made it worse. While I do enjoy Star Wars The Old Republic immensely, how it handled Revan is criminal. He is introduced into the game during the Revanite quest on Dromund Kaz. where a cult has arisen around his name, a cult that completely misunderstands Revan and his goals. This is bad enough, but could potentially lead to compelling storytelling. What is worse is when Revan himself finally appears. He is kept as a prisoner of the Sith Empire, who are far from the untold horrors that Kreia implied, instead being a retread of the Galactic Empire, just with more Sith Lords, and must be freed by the Republic player. Later he attempts to use something called the Foundry, a similar technology to the Starforge, to utterly destroy the Empire, with no regard to the innocents under Sith rule. This is entirely uncharacteristic of Revan, but even worse is his defeat at the hands of the Empire player. This legendary Jedi Knight turned Sith Lord turned something new is defeated by some no-name Sith or bounty hunter or Imperial agent. And because Star Wars cannot leave well enough alone, Revan returns in the Shadow of Revan DLC, now a deranged madman using the Revanite cult and more retconned technology to attack both Empire and Republic alike. It is revealed that after his death, Revan was split into two entities, an entity of light and an entity of dark. This is ludicrous, as, in the famous words of Han Solo,
"That's not how the Force works."
When one dies, they become one with the Force. If they undergo the proper training or are powerful enough to leave their mark on the galaxy, they can then manifest as a Force ghost. Nowhere is it written that being one who treads the line between light and dark will split you into two beings. Besides, one who treads the line between light and dark is not how I would describe Revan. He is certainly learned in both the Jedi and Sith way, and he is capable of harnessing the powers of both dark and light, but his fall to the dark side in both versions was never truly a fall. Version alone, he was brainwashed, thus he never truly tread the line. This notion is such fanficky nonsense, it is baffling that it ever made it past the idea stage. Yet we are not done with fanficky nonsense, as the third Revan is even more baffling than the second. When the original KOTOR was released, fans were excited to create their own Jedi or Sith character. To this day, that is perhaps the most popular thing about Star Wars RPGs, the opportunity to leave one's own mark on the Star Wars galaxy. Personally, it is my favorite thing about the SWTOR MMO. However, the twist halfway through the game changed everything. Suddenly your character wasn't your character. They were Revan, the Dark Lord of the Sith, the prodigal knight. And, as is only natural when a massively important character is introduced in such an expansive universe, a canon version of Revan was soon confirmed. Revan was confirmed not long after the game's release to be a male Jedi Guardian who chose the light side and married Bastila Shan. For Star Wars fans, this was not a big deal in the slightest, as the character of Revan would go on to be mentioned in books such as the Bane trilogy and Darth Plagueis, as well as to star in his own comic line. It was only logical that he should have a canon path. But RPG fans, specifically BioWare fans, were and are less pleased. Those who chose a dark side or dark side female Revan find their character deemed non-canon. It is in a way understandable that people would take umbrage to this. However, Revan was made to be an impactful character in the Star Wars galaxy, one with a rich history and lore, and thus a canon choice needed to be made. Some have argued for keeping Revan's identity entirely secret, keeping him a figure shrouded in mystery, and while that is an interesting concept, it is not one that works when put into practice. Mysterious characters only remain mysterious when they aren't put under the magnifying glass. Darth Vader was once mysterious. The Emperor, Darth Maul, General Grievous, Boba Fett, the Mandalorian, Kylo Ren, all were once mysterious. Now they are no longer because they played roles in the story that resulted in the shroud being removed. Revan is much the same. This is not a universe like Dragon Age or Mass Effect, where the game is the main canon for the universe. This game was introduced into a pre-made universe and had as its central character a figure that would go on to inspire one of the most iconic philosophies in Star Wars, the rule of Revan was never going to remain a vague character with vague origins and a vague future. Thus, someone's headcanon was always going to be spurned. It is no doubt obvious at this point that my own opinions color my talking points. I make no effort to conceal this fact. Revan's character as established in KOTOR 2 is the most fascinating to me. A man who chose to sacrifice his own morality for the greater good is a concept I very much enjoy. In the recent show Andor, the character of Luthen Rael is very similar to this.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm. Kindness, kinship. Love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight has set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
There's simply an abundance of story threads that can grow from such a character. For EA and BioWare to completely throw that aside in favor of a brainwashing story that leads to an incredibly idiotic split-in-two conclusion is still baffling. Never has a piece of Star Wars content been more insulting to me than Shadow of Revan. Yes, even more than Rise of Skywalker, and I loathe that film. If I didn't care about the stories to come in future expansions, I would have stopped playing the MMO right then and there. As for the canonization of his gender and path, I never thought much of it. I simply assumed Revan was a man, and so when that was revealed as the case, I simply did not care. And Star Wars storytelling is typically colored with a light side bent, so the light path seemed more plausible as the canon ending. Where I do have an opinion is on the Revan Bastila romance. Personally, I find this story simultaneously adorable and beautifully tragic. The banter between the pair of them is too compelling to dislike, and the concept of her saving him from death, and then him saving her from the dark side, is just the kind of thing I love in my love stories. But the best, and worst, part is him leaving her in the end. His duty calls him to the unknown regions, and he cannot bring his wife with him.
Ironic.
He fought back against the Jedi's fear of attachment, and yet in the end, he was forced to let go of all he feared to lose in order to fulfill his destiny. Star Wars has always been a deeply tragic story, and yet simultaneously a hopeful one. Revan's tale of war, betrayal, sacrifice, and love is quintessentially Star Wars. Revan is my favorite character in the Star Wars mythos. His complex story, his sacrifices, his love, and frankly, his design are all immensely compelling to me. I will never understand why BioWare saw fit to cast such a rich story aside for such a lackluster one. All I can hope is that eventually, the tragedy of Darth Revan the Just can be fully told in the way it deserves. Thank you all for joining me on my quest. If you enjoyed the video and like what I do here, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel further, or if you'd like to request a future video topic or vote on pre-chosen topics, consider joining the Knights Realm Patreon. The link is in the description below. In any case, I will see you all on our next adventure, whenever that